Get your entitled black ass out of my line? You think you're something special? I don't give a damn who you claim to be. The words sliced through the crowded terminal like a serrated blade, causing heads to snap toward the first-class check-in counter where an airport supervisor with a tight bun and a security badge that reads Marcia towers over a composed young woman. Her face is flushed crimson, spittle flying from her lips as she jabs a finger toward the exit. Security. Remove this girl trying to scam her way into first class with a fake ID. These people always think they deserve special treatment. Sasha stands perfectly still, her designer luggage beside her, passport and boarding pass clutched in trembling fingers. 23 years of practiced dignity keep her spine straight despite the public humiliation burning across her cheeks. The surrounding crowd parts like the Red Sea as two security officers approach, their hands hovering near their belts. Whispers ripple through the terminal, some sympathetic, others suspicious, most simply uncomfortable with the spectacle unfolding before their morning flights. "My name is Sasha Obama," she says with deliberate calm, though her voice wavers slightly. "There's been a misunderstanding with my reservation that I've been trying to resolve. Please check the system again." The statement hangs in the air, neither a plea nor a demand, but the supervisor's eyes narrow with disdain. "Yeah, and I'm Michelle Obama," she sneers, gesturing to the security officers. "Get her out of here before I call the police for attempted fraud." As the officers grip her elbows, Sasha's phone buzzes. She glances down at the screen, a fleeting smile crossing her face despite the chaos surrounding her. "You might want to wait just 5 minutes before you do something you'll regret for the rest of your career," she says quietly. "My father just arrived." But to understand how we got here, how the daughter of one of the most recognizable men in America found herself being publicly humiliated and nearly dragged from Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport on a crisp autumn morning, we need to go back 8 hours, to when this day began like any other for both Sasha Obama and airport supervisor Marcia Reeves. If you're watching this video, make sure to subscribe right now and comment where you're watching from. You won't want to miss what happens next in this incredible true story of mistaken identity and redemption. The morning had begun unremarkably for Marshall Reeves. His alarm clock, the same General Electric model he'd owned since 1994, blared at precisely 4:15 a.m. as it had every workday for the past 27 years. The 58-year-old supervisor rolled from his bed with a groan that seemed to originate from somewhere deep in his bones, silencing the persistent buzz with a practiced slap. The darkness outside his bedroom window was absolute. Dawn wouldn't break for hours yet. "Another day in paradise," he muttered to the empty room, a ritual as ingrained as the rest of his morning routine. Since Judith had left 3 years ago, taking the dog and half the furniture, Marshall's life had settled into a rhythm of solitary efficiency. Coffee brewed while he showered. Toast popped as he knotted his tie. NPR murmured in the background as he gathered his keys, wallet, and the lunch he'd packed the night before. By 5:07 a.m., he was backing his 2008 Buick out of the driveway of his Arlington townhouse, mentally preparing for another 12-hour shift managing the ever-increasing chaos of the airport's check-in counters. What no one at the airport knew, what Marshall had carefully hidden beneath his pressed shirts and regulation ties, was that yesterday had been his last performance review before retirement eligibility, and it hadn't gone well. Customer satisfaction scores below acceptable thresholds, the HR representative had noted, sliding a graph across the desk that showed Marshall's metrics in glaring red, well below the departmental average. Passenger complaints up 17% from last quarter. The words still burned in his mind, alongside the final statement that had kept him awake most of the night. Improvement required for full pension consideration. 32 years at the same airport, working his way up from baggage handler to supervisor, and now some 20-something with a business degree was threatening his retirement over customer satisfaction. As if anyone was satisfied at an airport these days. As if the job wasn't hard enough without passengers becoming increasingly entitled, increasingly hostile, increasingly. Marshall's grip tightened on his steering wheel. He had 6 months to turn those numbers around or face a reduced pension. 6 months to smile through gritted teeth at passengers who showed up late, argued about baggage fees, and tried every scam in the book to upgrade to first class. 6 months of swallowing his pride while the stress ulcer that had been developing since the pandemic continued to burn a hole in his stomach lining. Across town, in a Georgetown brownstone that hummed with quiet luxury, Sasha Obama's day was beginning with considerably more promise. At 23, she had finally found her footing after years in the public eye. The awkward teenage years spent in the White House had given way to a confident young woman pursuing a master's degree in public policy, determined to forge her own path while honoring her family's legacy of service. Her 6:00 a.m. alarm played Sam Cooke's "A Change Is Gonna Come," a song her father had often played on Sunday mornings while making his famous pancakes. The familiar melody brought a smile to her face as she stretched and reached for her phone, checking messages that had arrived overnight. Today was important, her first solo presentation at a youth leadership conference in Chicago, her father's political birthplace. The symbolism wasn't lost on her, nor was the pressure to excel. A text from her father appeared at the top of her notifications. "You're going to be amazing today, Sash. Mom and I are so proud of you stepping into this spotlight on your own terms. Call when you land in Chicago. Love you more than you know." The message warmed her, easing the knot of anxiety that had been building in her stomach for days. At the conference, for the first time, she wouldn't be introduced as former President Obama's daughter, but as a speaker in her own right, Sasha Obama, advocate for educational equity and youth empowerment. The change had been her choice, a small but significant step toward establishing her own identity separate from her famous parents. Her Georgetown apartment, though modest by celebrity standards, reflected both her privileged upbringing and her emerging independence. Secret Service still maintained a discreet presence, a fact of life she'd long ago accepted, but they'd adapted to her insistence on as much normalcy as possible. Agent Lydia Chen, her primary protection detail for the past 2 years, had become something of a friend, respecting Sasha's boundaries while fulfilling her protective duties with unobtrusive efficiency. "Good morning, Ms. Obama," Chen said, appearing in the kitchen doorway as Sasha prepared her morning tea. At 34, Chen was closer in age to Sasha than many previous agents, making their relationship less awkward. "The car will be ready at 7:15. Weather in Chicago is clear, temperature expected to reach the mid-60s. "Thanks, Lydia," Sasha replied, adding honey to her tea. "Any scheduled changes I should know about?" "Actually, yes," Chen said, consulting her phone. "There's been a routing change for your flight. Due to maintenance issues with the original aircraft, you've been rebooked on an earlier direct flight. We'll need to leave in 45 minutes. Sasha nodded, mentally adjusting her morning routine. "That's fine. At least we won't have to deal with the Atlanta layover. Has my father's office been notified of the change? He's flying in for the afternoon panel." "Yes, all coordinated," Chen confirmed. "He'll be arriving about 2 hours after you. Different airline, though. He's coming in from New York after his UN meeting." As Sasha hurried through her abbreviated morning routine, she felt a familiar mix of excitement and anxiety. These independent professional appearances were still new territory, still accompanied by the nagging worry that she wouldn't measure up to the Obama legacy. Her sister Malia had seemingly transitioned into adulthood with effortless grace, her work in film production earning respect independent of her famous name. Sasha's path had been less direct, more marked by the starts and stops of someone still finding her voice. What she couldn't know, was that the simple flight change would set in motion a chain of events that would test not only her composure, but the very identity she was working so hard to establish. Marshal Reeves arrived at Reagan National at precisely 5:45 a.m., swiping his security badge at the employee entrance with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had performed the same action thousands of times. The early morning staff briefing passed in a blur of announcements that barely registered. Weather delays expected in the Midwest, a VIP arrival requiring additional security coordination, staffing shortages at the North Terminal check-in counters. "Reeves," his manager said as the briefing concluded, "I need you at first-class check-in today. Johnson called in sick again." Marshall nodded, hiding his displeasure. The first-class counter meant dealing with the most entitled passengers, the platinum cardholders who expected red carpet treatment and became indignant at the slightest inconvenience. On a normal day, he would have voiced an objection, requested a different assignment, but with his performance review still fresh, he merely gathered his things and headed to the counter. "Oh, and Reeves," the manager added, "we've got several high-profile passengers coming through this morning. State Department officials, some diplomatic corps, and apparently one of the Obama girls on her way to Chicago. Make sure everything runs smoothly, all right? No incidents." "No incidents," Marshall repeated, the words tasting bitter. As if he didn't know how to do his job after 3 decades. As if he needed to be told to treat VIPs with extra care while his pension hung in the balance. By 7:30 a.m., Marshall had settled into the rhythm of the morning rush, processing first-class passengers with efficient detachment. Smile, scan, check ID, issue boarding pass next. The mechanical nature of the work allowed his mind to wander, dwelling on the injustice of his situation. 32 years of service, and now everything threatened by customer satisfaction scores and the whims of passengers who didn't understand the complexities of airline operations. When Sasha Obama approached his counter at 7:43 a.m., Marshal Reeves was distracted by a system alert about overbooking in first class. Another problem he'd have to solve, another potential confrontation with an entitled passenger. He barely glanced up as she placed her passport and phone on the counter. "Good morning," Sasha said, her voice carrying the polite formality she'd been taught since childhood. "I have a reservation for the 8:30 flight to Chicago." Marshall took her passport without looking up, his attention still focused on the overbooking alert flashing on his screen. "Name?" he asked, fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Obama, Sasha Obama." Something in his brain misfired at that moment, perhaps the stress of his performance review, perhaps the unlikelihood of a former president's daughter appearing at his counter without fanfare, perhaps simple prejudice that he would never admit to harboring. Whatever the cause, Marshal Reeves looked up with narrowed eyes, taking in the young black woman standing before him, designer luggage, simple but expensive clothing, the unmistakable confidence of privilege, and made a split-second judgment. "Right," he said, sarcasm dripping from the word. "And I'm Brad Pitt." He glanced down at the passport, noting the name without registering its authenticity. "I'm going to need to see additional identification, miss." Beside Sasha, Agent Chen shifted slightly, her hand moving toward the credentials in her jacket pocket, but Sasha gave a subtle headshake. Years of public scrutiny had taught her to handle such situations with grace. People often didn't recognize her outside the context of her family. She'd grown from the gangly 12-year-old who entered the White House into a poised young woman. "Of course," Sasha replied, maintaining her composure as she withdrew her driver's license and university ID from her wallet. "Here you are." Marshall examined the IDs with exaggerated scrutiny, the overbooking issue momentarily forgot. The documents looked legitimate, high-quality fakes, he assumed. The photo matched the young woman before him, the name consistent across all identification. But something inside him, something ugly that he would later be unable to explain, refused to accept the reality before him. "These seem to be in order," he said slowly, "but given the nature of your claim, I'll need to verify this with my supervisor." "Is there a problem?" Agent Chen asked, stepping forward slightly. Marshall's eyes flicked to Chen, noting her professional attire and alert posture. "And you are Ms. Obama's security detail?" Chen replied, her tone neutral but firm as she displayed her Secret Service credentials. For a fraction of a second, doubt flickered across Marshall's face. But then another passenger jostled against the stanchions of the first-class line, sending a child's toy clattering across the floor. And in that moment of distraction, Marshall's skepticism hardened into certainty. The ID and credentials before him had to be elaborate fakes. The Secret Service wouldn't allow a former president's daughter to stand in a regular check-in line, would they? They'd have private entrances, special arrangements. This was clearly a scam, someone trying to leverage a famous name for an upgrade or special treatment. "I'll need you both to step aside while I verify these documents," Marshall said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used with suspected rule breakers. "This shouldn't take long if everything is legitimate." Sasha felt a familiar weight settle in her stomach, the leaden feeling that accompanied these moments of suspicion and scrutiny. Despite her family's status, despite her own accomplishments, there were always people who looked at her and saw only a black girl reaching beyond her station, claiming an identity that couldn't possibly belong to her. "Mr. Reeves," she said, reading his name badge, "I understand you need to verify my identity. That's perfectly fine, but perhaps we could do this discreetly. I'm sure neither of us wants unnecessary attention." Her reasonable tone only seemed to irritate Marshall further. Entitled, he thought, thinks she can tell me how to do my job. Out loud, he said, "Please step aside, miss. Next in line, please." As another passenger moved forward, Sasha and Agent Chen stepped to one side of the counter. Chen immediately began speaking quietly into her wrist microphone, requesting backup and alerting her team to the situation. Sasha took a deep breath, centering herself the way her mother had taught her. This wasn't the first time her identity had been questioned, and it likely wouldn't be the last. The key was to remain calm, to not give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her lose composure. What should have been a simple verification process quickly spiraled. Marshall called not his immediate supervisor but airport security, reporting suspicious individuals with fraudulent identification attempting to access first-class services. When the security officers arrived, Marshall presented the situation as a clear-cut case of attempted fraud. his earlier doubts buried beneath a veneer of procedural righteousness. "These individuals are claiming that this young woman is Sasha Obama," he told the officers, emphasizing the name with skepticism. "They've presented what appears to be Secret Service credentials, but given the high-profile nature of the claim, I thought it best to involve security." Two security officers, both middle-aged men with the weathered expressions of those who have seen every scam imaginable in the airport environment, assessed the situation with professional detachment. The older of the two, Officer Daniels, took the identification documents Marshall had been holding and examined them carefully. "Ma'am," he addressed Sasha, "can you tell me where you're headed today?" "Chicago," Sasha replied calmly. "I'm speaking at the Youth Leadership Conference at the Palmer House this afternoon." Officer Daniels nodded, then turned to Agent Chen. "And your credentials, ma'am?" Chen presented her Secret Service identification again, along with additional documentation confirming her assignment to Sasha Obama's protective detail. The officer studied these with greater care than Marshall had shown, his expression giving away nothing. "If you could both wait here for a moment," Daniels said finally, stepping away with his partner to confer privately. The minutes stretched uncomfortably as the officers spoke in hushed tones, occasionally glancing back at Sasha and Chen. Around them, the airport continued its morning bustle, though nearby passengers cast curious glances at the unfolding scene. Sasha maintained her dignified posture, though anxiety fluttered in her chest. She was accustomed to being doubted, but this level of scrutiny was unusual, especially with Chen's credentials on display. When the officers returned, their demeanor had shifted subtly. Officer Daniels addressed Marshall rather than Sasha or Chen. "Sir, these credentials appear to be in order. The Secret Service has confirmed that Agent Chen is assigned to Ms. Obama's detail." Marshall's face flushed, but rather than acknowledging his error, he doubled down. "That doesn't prove she's who she claims to be. Anyone could hire a bodyguard and claim to be a celebrity." "Mr. Reeves," Daniels began, discomfort evident in his voice, but Marshall cut him off. "Look at her," he said, gesturing toward Sasha with a dismissive wave. "Does she look like she has a security detail to you? Where's the rest of her team? Where's the special treatment we always have to arrange for VIPs? This is obviously a scam to get special treatment, and I'm not going to be the one who falls for it." The words hung in the air, their implication clear to everyone within earshot. What exactly did a former president's daughter look like in Marshall Reeves' estimation? What was it about the composed young black woman standing before him that made her claim to identity so implausible in his eyes? Officer Daniels cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the confrontation was taking. "Sir, perhaps we should contact your supervisor to resolve this matter." "I am the supervisor on duty," Marshall replied, his voice rising. "And I'm telling you these people are trying to scam their way into first class with fake IDs. It happens every day." By now, a small crowd had gathered, drawn by the escalating tension. Phones had emerged, recording the confrontation. Sasha felt her heart rate accelerate, aware that this incident was moments away from becoming a social media spectacle. Years of media training kicked in. Keep your face neutral, don't give them anything to misinterpret. Remember that everything can be taken out of context. "Mr. Reeves," she said quietly, "I understand you're doing your job, but this is becoming unnecessarily complicated. Perhaps if you called the airline's VIP services department, they could confirm my reservation and identity." "I don't need to call anyone," Marshall snapped, his composure cracking. "I've been doing this job since before you were born, and I know a fake ID when I see one." It was at this moment that Marshall made the fatal error that would soon plaster his name across news headlines and social media platforms nationwide. Turning to the security officers, he raised his voice to a level clearly meant for the gathering audience. "Get your entitled black ass out of my line. You think you're something special. I don't give a damn who you claim to be." The words sliced through the crowded terminal like a serrated blade, causing heads to snap toward the first-class check-in counter where Marshall, face flushed crimson, towered over Sasha. "Security! Remove this girl trying to scam her way into first class with a fake ID. These people always think they deserve special treatment." The slur hung in the air like poison gas, contaminating everything it touched. Officer Daniels' expression hardened immediately, and his partner took a physical step back from Marshall, as if to distance himself from the supervisor's words. Around them, passengers gasped, phones recording every moment of the unfolding disaster. Sasha stood perfectly still, her designer luggage beside her, passport and boarding pass clutched in trembling fingers. 23 years of practiced dignity kept her spine straight despite the public humiliation burning across her cheeks. The surrounding crowd parted like the Red Sea as the security officers shifted uncomfortably, clearly uncertain how to proceed now that the situation had escalated so dramatically. "My name is Sasha Obama," she said with deliberate calm, though her voice wavered slightly. "There's been a misunderstanding with my reservation that I've been trying to resolve. Please check the system again." The statement hung in the air, neither a plea nor a demand, but Marshall's eyes narrowed with disdain. "Yeah, and I'm Michelle Obama," he sneered, gesturing to the security officers. "Get her out of here before I call the police for attempted fraud." As the officers approached, clearly uncomfortable but still moving to follow Marshall's directive, Sasha's phone buzzed. She glanced down at the screen, a fleeting smile crossing her face despite the chaos surrounding her. "You might want to wait just 5 minutes before you do something you'll regret for the rest of your career," she said quietly. "My father just arrived." The airport's VIP entrance, located discreetly away from the main terminal, typically processed diplomatic dignitaries, high-ranking government officials, and the occasional celebrity with minimal fanfare. Staff assigned to this entrance were extensively trained in discretion and efficiency, ensuring that high-profile travelers could move through the airport with minimal disruption. At 7:52 a.m., the doors to this entrance slid open to admit a small entourage led by a tall, slender man whose distinctive profile caused the security staff to straighten immediately. Former President Barack Obama, accompanied by a phalanx of Secret Service agents, entered with the relaxed confidence that had become his trademark. Unlike his younger daughter, whose public appearances were still infrequent enough that she could sometimes move through public spaces unrecognized, the 44th President of the United States could not enter any room without causing a ripple of recognition. "Good morning," he greeted the staff with characteristic warmth. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" The lead security officer, momentarily starstruck despite years of processing VIPs, nodded perhaps too enthusiastically. "Yes, Mr. President, it's an honor to have you with us today." Obama smiled, the familiar crinkles appearing at the corners of his eyes. At 63, his hair had gone fully silver, lending him an elder statesman gravitas that complemented his natural charisma. "I'm just here to catch a flight to Chicago. Family business." He glanced at his watch, the same modest Fitbit he'd worn for years, a detail often noted by the press as evidence of his unpretentious personal style. "My daughter should already be here. Sasha Obama. She's on the earlier flight." Before the officer could respond, one of the Secret Service agents touched his earpiece, his expression shifting from neutral to concerned in an instant. He stepped close to the former president, speaking in a low voice. "Sir, we have a situation. Agent Chen reports that Ms. Obama is being detained at the main terminal check-in. There appears to be some issue with her identification." Obama's smile faded, replaced by the focused expression that White House staff had once dubbed the Situation Room face. He turned to the security officer, all casual conversation forgot. "It seems my daughter is experiencing some difficulty at the main check-in. I'd appreciate your assistance in resolving this matter quickly." The officer, suddenly pale, immediately reached for his radio. "Of course, Mr. President. Let me get a supervisor down here right away." "No need," Obama replied, already moving toward the main terminal. "I think it would be best if I handled this personally." His tone remained measured, but the set of his shoulders communicated urgency that his security detail immediately responded to, forming a protective formation around him as they moved through the airport. As they walked, Obama's mind raced through possibilities. Sasha had experienced her share of racial profiling over the years, despite, or sometimes because of, her famous name. He and Michelle had prepared both their daughters for these moments as best they could, teaching them to maintain their dignity while asserting their rights. But knowing your child is facing discrimination never gets easier, no matter how well you've prepared them. Back at the first-class check-in counter, the situation had reached an impasse. Marshall Reeves, having publicly committed to his position, refused to back down despite the increasingly obvious signs that he had made a grievous error. The crowd of onlookers had grown, many openly recording the confrontation on their phones. Officer Daniels and his partner had positioned themselves between Marshall and Sasha, trying to de-escalate while awaiting instructions from their superiors. Agent Chen, maintaining her professional composure despite the situation, spoke quietly into her microphone. "Arrival team be advised, situation at main terminal check-in counter. Principal is being detained. Request immediate assistance." Sasha, for her part, maintained the dignified silence her mother had modeled throughout years of public scrutiny. The initial shock of Marshall's outburst had faded, replaced by a familiar, weary recognition. This wasn't the first time someone had looked at her and seen only her race, dismissing her identity and humanity in the same breath. It likely wouldn't be the last. The crowd's murmuring suddenly shifted in tone. a wave of whispers and gasps moving through the terminal. Heads turned toward the north entrance, where a distinctive figure had appeared, flanked by dark-suited agents. Even at a distance, Barack Obama commanded attention, his purposeful stride and the security detail surrounding him creating a clear path through the startled travelers. As he approached the check-in area, recognition dawned on faces throughout the terminal. Phones raised higher, capturing the moment when the former president of the United States arrived to address what had become, in the space of 15 minutes, a full-blown viral incident in the making. Officer Daniels was the first official to recognize the approaching entourage. His eyes widened, and he quickly nudged his partner, who turned and immediately straightened his posture. Marshal Reeves, still focused on Sasha and oblivious to the approaching storm, continued his tirade. "I don't care what your ID says. I know a scammer when I see one, and you're not getting special treatment in my line. Security, I want her escorted out of the terminal now." "Excuse me," came a voice from behind him, calm, measured, and instantly recognizable to anyone who had watched a State of the Union address or presidential news conference over 8 historic years. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding about my daughter's identity." Marshall froze, the blood draining from his face as he slowly turned to find himself face-to-face with Barack Obama. The former president stood with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to commanding rooms far more intimidating than an airport terminal, his expression a careful neutral that nevertheless communicated volumes. Mr. President," Marshall stammered, his earlier certainty evaporating like morning dew. "There must be some mistake." "Yes," Obama agreed, his tone pleasant but firm. "There certainly has been." He moved past Marshall to stand beside his daughter, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder. "Are you all right, Sasha?" She nodded, the relief evident in her eyes despite her composed expression. "I'm fine, Dad, just a mix-up with my reservation." Obama turned back to Marshall, who seemed to be physically shrinking under the former president's gaze. The surrounding crowd had gone utterly silent, hundreds of phones capturing every moment of the extraordinary scene. "It seems," Obama said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the hushed terminal, "that there's been some confusion about my daughter's identity. I'd like to resolve this quickly so she doesn't miss her flight to Chicago." He smiled, though the expression didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm sure we're all interested in finding a solution that doesn't involve further embarrassment for anyone involved." The graceful offering of a dignified exit was not lost on Officer Daniels, who stepped forward immediately. "Mr. President, we apologize for the inconvenience. We'll get Ms. Obama checked in right away." He turned to his partner. "Peterson, please find a customer service manager to assist immediately." Marshal Reeves stood paralyzed, the full impact of his error crashing over him in waves. Not only had he publicly accused a former president's daughter of identity fraud, but he had done so with language that was explicitly racial and now documented by dozens of recording devices. In the space of 15 minutes, he had not only jeopardized his pension but possibly ended his career and made himself the next viral sensation for all the wrong reasons. I didn't," he began, but words failed him as the reality of his situation became clear. Obama regarded him thoughtfully, his expression unreadable. Those who had worked closely with the former president during times of crisis would have recognized the careful calculation happening behind those steady eyes, weighing options, considering implications, determining the most constructive path forward. "Mr. Reeves, is it?" Obama said finally, reading the supervisor's name badge. "I understand you're doing your job, checking identifications and ensuring security protocols are followed." "That's important work." He paused, allowing the gracious framing to settle before continuing. "But I think we can also acknowledge that something went wrong in this interaction. Perhaps there's a conversation to be had about why my daughter's identification was questioned so vigorously when her documents were in order." The measured words, delivered without anger but with unmistakable purpose, hung in the air. Everyone within earshot understood the subtext. This wasn't merely about mistaken identity, but about the assumptions that had led to that mistake and the language used to express it. A customer service manager arrived, breathless and wide-eyed at finding herself suddenly in the presence of the former First Family. "Mr. President, Ms. Obama, I cannot apologize enough for this incident. Please, if you'll come with me, we'll get you both checked in immediately and escort you to the first-class lounge." Obama nodded graciously. "Thank you, that would be appreciated." He turned to the security officers. "Officers, thank you for your assistance as well." As the manager led them away, Obama paused beside Marshall, who remained frozen in place, perspiration beading on his forehead. The former president leaned slightly closer, speaking quietly enough that only Marshall could hear the words. "You know," he said, My wife and I spent a lot of time teaching our girls how to respond when moments like this happen. Because we always knew they would happen, no matter who their father was. He straightened, adjusting his suit jacket. I hope you'll take some time to think about why you were so certain my daughter couldn't be who she said she was. That kind of reflection can be illuminating. With that, he rejoined Sasha and the customer service manager, leaving Marshall Reeves standing alone at the check-in counter, surrounded by disapproving stares and the unmistakable sounds of social media videos being uploaded with captions already forming in their creators' minds. As the Obamas were escorted toward the premium lounge, the hushed terminal erupted into excited chatter. Passengers who had witnessed the confrontation began sharing their recordings, the incident spreading across social media platforms with the speed only reserved for moments of genuine cultural significance. By the time Sasha's flight departed for Chicago, the first news alerts were already appearing on smartphones throughout the airport. Former President Obama intervenes after daughter allegedly racially profiled at Reagan National Airport. But this story, like most stories that capture public attention in the age of instant communication, was only beginning. The viral moment would spark national conversations about racial profiling, privilege, and accountability. For Marshall Reeves, it would force a painful reckoning with biases he had never acknowledged. For Sasha Obama, it would become an unexpected platform to address issues she had experienced throughout her life, but rarely discussed publicly. And for the airport authority, it would prompt an overdue examination of training procedures and corporate culture. The confrontation at Reagan National Airport lasted less than 20 minutes from beginning to end. Its repercussions would echo for months to come. If you're enjoying this incredible story, make sure to subscribe to our channel right now and comment where you're watching from. The most shocking developments are still to come. The premium lounge provided a welcome sanctuary from the chaos of the main terminal. As the door closed behind them, shutting out the buzz of excited conversations and clicking smartphone cameras, Sasha felt her carefully maintained composure begin to crack. She took a deep breath, fighting the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. Barack Obama, attuned to his daughter's feelings after 23 years of fatherhood, recognized the signs immediately. "Hey," he said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You okay?" Sasha nodded, not trusting herself to speak just yet. The customer service manager, sensing the need for privacy, discreetly stepped away after ensuring they had everything they needed. "I'm sorry you had to deal with that," Obama said once they were alone, his voice carrying the weight of a father who, despite all his accomplishments and power, couldn't shield his children from every hurt the world inflicted. "You handled it with incredible grace." "I'm fine," Sasha managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "It's not like it was the first time." The simple statement hung between them, heavy with shared understanding. Not the first time she'd been questioned, doubted, assumed to be someone she wasn't, or more accurately, assumed not to be who she was. Not the first time she'd maintained her dignity in the face of humiliation. Not the first time her father had witnessed the world's failure to see his daughter as she deserved to be seen. "No," Obama agreed quietly. "Not the first time." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "You know, when you were little, your mom and I used to worry about how to prepare you girls for moments like this. How to teach you to stand your ground without putting yourselves in danger. How to help you understand that other people's assumptions about you weren't a reflection of your worth." His voice softened with memory. "I remember Michelle saying, we can't protect them from this. All we can do is make sure they know none of it is their fault." Sasha smiled despite herself. "Mom always did cut straight to the truth." She sank into one of the plush lounge chairs, the adrenaline of the confrontation finally ebbing. "You didn't have to come over, you know. Agent Chen had already called for backup. It would have been resolved eventually." "Eventually," Obama echoed, taking the seat across from her. "But not before that man had the opportunity to further humiliate you, to make you miss your flight, to create even more of a spectacle." He shook his head. "Some things a father doesn't leave to eventually." Sasha studied her father's face, noting the silver at his temples that seemed to have multiplied since his presidency, the fine lines around his eyes that deepened when he was troubled. Despite the years out of office, he still carried himself with the distinctive mixture of gravitas and approachability that had defined his public persona. But in this moment, he wasn't the former leader of the free world. He was simply a father hurting for his child. "Do you think it will be all over the internet?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. In 2025, a confrontation involving a former president and his daughter with racial overtones no less was guaranteed viral status. Obama's expression was rueful. "I'd say that ship has sailed. Peterson in the press office already texted me that they're getting media inquiries." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. The question is how you want to handle it. We can issue a brief statement asking for privacy, let it blow over. Or we can use it, Sasha finished, following his train of thought. Make it a teaching moment about racial profiling, about how even being an Obama doesn't exempt you from prejudice. That would be your call, Obama said carefully. Your mother and I have always tried to protect your privacy, let you live as normal a life as possible under the circumstances. You're an adult now, making your own decisions about when and how to use your voice. Sasha nodded, considering the implications. Her planned speech at the Chicago conference had focused on educational equity, not her personal experiences with discrimination. But perhaps there was a way to incorporate this morning's incident to help the audience understand why these issues mattered on a visceral, human level. I need to think about it, she said finally. But I'm leaning toward addressing it somehow. Not to shame that guy specifically, but to start a conversation about the assumptions people make. She hesitated, then added, if I'm going to have this platform anyway, I might as well use it for something meaningful. Obama smiled, pride evident in his expression. That sounds like something your mother would say. His phone buzzed, and he glanced down at the screen. Speaking of whom, she's seen the news, says to tell you she's proud of how you handled yourself and to call her when you can. He looked up with the gentle, teasing expression that had always been part of their family dynamic. Also says to remind me that she told me so about taking an earlier flight to travel with you. The familiar banter helped normalize the moment, pulling them back from the brink of heavier conversation. Sasha laughed, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. Mom's always right. You'd think you'd have learned that by now. 28 years of marriage, and I'm still learning that lesson daily, Obama replied with a chuckle. His expression grew more serious. Your flight boards in about 20 minutes. Are you sure you're okay to travel alone? I could see about changing my ticket. Dad, Sasha said firmly, I'm 23. I can handle a flight to Chicago by myself, especially now that the airline is falling all over themselves to make sure I have a smooth journey. She gestured toward the lounge entrance where the customer service manager hovered attentively. Besides, I need some time to think about what I want to say this afternoon. Obama nodded, respecting her independence. All right, I'll see you at the conference then. My panel is right after your speech. He stood, checking his watch. I should head to my gate, different terminal altogether. As he gathered his things, a thought seemed to strike him. You know, that man at the check-in counter, Reeves, he's probably having the worst day of his professional life right now. He brought that on himself, Sasha pointed out, a hint of justified anger coloring her tone. True, Obama acknowledged, but people rarely change when they're being publicly shamed. They just become defensive, dig in deeper. He paused thoughtfully. Sometimes the most powerful response isn't public condemnation, but offering a path to genuine understanding. Sasha raised an eyebrow, recognizing her father's characteristic tendency toward finding reconciliation where others might seek retribution. You're not suggesting I need to forgive him or something, are you? Because that's a lot to ask after being called. She trailed off, unwilling to repeat the slur. Not at all, Obama assured her. Forgiveness is your choice on your timeline. I'm just thinking about the most effective way to create actual change. He smiled slightly. 8 years in the Oval Office taught me that public shaming rarely changes hearts and minds, but personal connection sometimes can. Before Sasha could respond, a gentle knock at the lounge door preceded the entrance of a different airline representative, older, more senior in bearing than the previous manager. Excuse me, Mr. President, Ms. Obama, the woman said, her professional demeanor not quite hiding her nervousness. I'm Patricia Alvarez, the Director of Customer Experience for the airline. I wanted to personally apologize for the inexcusable treatment Ms. Obama experienced this morning. I assure you that we are taking immediate action regarding Mr. Reeves' conduct. Obama nodded acknowledgement. I appreciate your coming to speak with us directly, Ms. Alvarez. These situations are never easy to address. No, sir, they are not, Alvarez agreed, her expression troubled. But they must be addressed nonetheless. Mr. Reeves has been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation and will be implementing additional training for all customer-facing staff. She turned to Sasha. Ms. Obama, your boarding process has been arranged. When you're ready, we'll escort you directly to the aircraft ahead of general boarding. Thank you, Sasha replied. As Alvarez turned to leave, a question formed in Sasha's mind. Ms. Alvarez, what will happen to Mr. Reeves? After the investigation, I mean. The airline director paused, seemingly surprised by the question. That would depend on the findings, but given the nature of the incident and the public attention it's receiving, she left the implication hanging. Sasha exchanged a glance with her father, a silent communication passing between them. I understand you need to conduct a thorough investigation, she said carefully, but I'd like to be kept informed about the outcome if possible. Of course, Ms. Obama. We'll ensure you're updated on any actions taken." With a respectful nod to both Obamas, Alvarez withdrew, leaving father and daughter alone again. "What are you thinking?" Obama asked, recognizing the contemplative expression that had settled on his daughter's face. Sasha considered the question, sorting through the tumult of emotions the morning had stirred. "I'm thinking about what you said about creating actual change versus public shaming. About what would actually make a difference in how people like Marshall Reeves see young black women like me." She met her father's eyes. "I'm not sure yet, but I think there might be a better way to handle this than just letting him be fired and moving on." Obama smiled, the pride in his expression unmistakable. "Whatever you decide, I know it will be thoughtful and purposeful. That's who you are." He checked the time again. "I really do need to get to my gate. Call me when you land." "I will," Sasha promised, rising to embrace her father. "Thanks for riding to the rescue, even though I could have handled it." "I know you could have," Obama replied, returning the hug. "But sometimes even grown-up daughters still need their dads." As they parted ways, Sasha settled back into her seat, her mind already working through what had happened and how she might transform a humiliating incident into something constructive. The speech she had carefully prepared for the afternoon's conference no longer seemed adequate. A new message was taking shape, one born from the raw experience of the morning, but reaching toward something more hopeful than simple recrimination. By the time her flight was called, Sasha Obama had the beginnings of a plan, not just for her speech, but for a more meaningful response to Marshall Reeves and the biases he represented. Whether it would work remained to be seen, but as her father had often told her, the most important changes often began with a single, courageous conversation. Marshall Reeves sat alone in a small office in the airport's administrative section, his world collapsing around him in real time. Through the glass partition, he could see airport officials huddled in conversation, occasionally glancing in his direction with expressions ranging from disapproval to outright anger. His phone, which he'd silenced after the first dozen notifications, continued to vibrate incessantly on the desk before him. Friends, family, and colleagues all undoubtedly reaching out after seeing his face plastered across social media and news sites. The headline from the Washington Post's breaking news alert still burned in his vision. "Airport supervisor suspended after racial confrontation with former president's daughter." Suspended. After 32 years of service, 3 decades of dragging himself out of bed before dawn to ensure the smooth operation of an increasingly chaotic system, his career had effectively ended in a 15-minute interaction that was now being dissected by millions of strangers online. The door opened, admitting Harold Fitzgerald, the airport's chief of operations and Marshall's superior for the past decade. Fitzgerald's expression was grave as he took the seat across from Marshall, placing a tablet on the desk between them. "I don't think I need to tell you how serious this situation is, Marshall," he began without preamble. "The videos are everywhere. The airline is facing calls for a boycott. The mayor has issued a statement condemning the incident." He gestured to the tablet, which displayed a Twitter feed scrolling with outraged comments. "It's a PR nightmare, and frankly, I don't see how we come back from this." Marshall stared at his hands, the weight of the morning's events crushing down on him. "I made a mistake, Harold. I didn't recognize her. It seemed implausible that a president's daughter would just show up at my counter without any advance notice or special arrangements." "A mistake," Fitzgerald repeated, his tone hardening. "Marshall, you called her, and I'm quoting the video here, an entitled black ass who was trying to scam her way into first class. That goes well beyond a simple misidentification." The words repeated back to him made Marshall flinch. Had he really said that? In the heat of the moment, with his performance review hanging over him and the persistent stress of the job corroding his patience, had those words actually come out of his mouth? "I don't. I've never thought of myself as." He began but couldn't finish the sentence. Racist. The word he couldn't bring himself to say, the accusation now being leveled at him by thousands of commenters online who had never met him, never known his life story, never understood the pressures that had been building for years. Fitzgerald sighed, the sound carrying decades of friendship and professional respect now strained to the breaking point. "It doesn't matter what you think of yourself, Marshall. It matters what you did, what you said." On camera, to the daughter of the first black president in American history. He shook his head, the gesture communicating volumes. "The airport authority has no choice but to place you on indefinite administrative leave while we conduct a formal investigation. Your badge and access credentials will be temporarily suspended." "And after the investigation?" Marshall asked, though he already knew the answer. "That depends on the findings," Fitzgerald replied diplomatically. "But I won't sugarcoat this, Marshall. I've been directed to begin processing early retirement paperwork. Given your years of service, you would receive a portion of your pension, though not the full benefits you were anticipating. The financial implications hit Marshall like a physical blow. A reduced pension meant adjusting all his retirement plans, selling the townhouse he'd purchased with Judith before the divorce, perhaps moving somewhere with a lower cost of living, abandoning the travel plans he'd been quietly nurturing for years. All because of 15 minutes of poor judgment. "I understand," he said finally, his voice hollow. "What happens now?" "Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings, then off airport property," Fitzgerald explained, his professional tone belied by the regret in his eyes. "You'll be contacted regarding the investigation process and any further steps." As Fitzgerald rose to leave, Marshall found his voice again. "Harold, wait. I need to know, is there any way to fix this? To apologize, to explain?" The operations chief paused at the door, considering the question. "The airport will issue a formal apology to the Obama family, of course. As for personal amends," he shook his head, "I wouldn't advise reaching out directly. Given the high-profile nature of the incident, any further contact could be misconstrued. The best thing you can do right now is lay low and cooperate fully with the investigation." With that, Fitzgerald left, leaving Marshall alone with the ruins of his career and the dawning recognition of how completely one moment of unchecked bias had derailed his life. As predicted, the security escort through the terminal was an exercise in humiliation. Colleagues averted their eyes as he passed, some whispering behind their hands. Passengers openly stared, a few even raising phones to capture his walk of shame. By the time he reached his car in the employee lot, Marshall felt stripped of his identity, reduced to a viral moment that would now define 3 decades of service. The drive home passed in a blur of talk radio commentators already discussing the incident, analyzing it as the latest example of America's ongoing struggle with racial bias. Marshall switched off the radio after the third mention of his name, unable to bear hearing strangers dissect his character based on the worst 15 minutes of his professional life. His townhouse, when he finally reached it, offered little comfort. The emptiness that had once represented independence after his divorce now felt like isolation. He moved mechanically through the rooms, drawing blinds against potential media intrusion, silencing his home phone after checking the dozen messages already accumulated, most from friends expressing disbelief or offering awkward support. In the kitchen, he opened the cabinet where he kept a bottle of bourbon for special occasions. If ever there was a day that called for a drink, this was it. But as he reached for the bottle, his hand froze. Alcohol wouldn't solve this problem. It wouldn't turn back time, wouldn't erase the videos circulating online, wouldn't restore his reputation or career. Instead, Marshall sank into his recliner, the same chair he'd occupied every evening for years, and forced himself to confront the question that had been hovering at the edges of his consciousness since the moment Barack Obama appeared at the check-in counter. Why had he been so certain, so adamantly certain, that the young woman before him couldn't possibly be who she claimed to be? In the privacy of his living room, with no one to impress or convince, Marshall Reeves began the painful process of honest self-examination. Meanwhile, at 30,000 feet, Sasha Obama sat in the first-class cabin of the flight to Chicago, her laptop open before her as she revised her conference speech. The airline had ensured she had an empty seat beside her, a small courtesy that allowed her the space to work without interruption. Still, she felt the occasional glances from fellow passengers who had undoubtedly seen the videos now circulating online. Agent Chen sat across the aisle, maintaining a discreet protective presence while allowing Sasha as much normalcy as possible. They had worked together long enough that Chen could sense when Sasha needed space versus security, adapting her approach accordingly. The speech Sasha had originally prepared focused on educational equity and youth empowerment, important topics, certainly, but suddenly feeling incomplete in light of the morning's events. She couldn't pretend the incident hadn't happened, couldn't compartmentalize her professional agenda from her personal experience. Nor did she want to. As she typed, deleting and rewriting sections of her prepared remarks, Sasha found herself incorporating elements of the confrontation, not as a victim narrative, but as a launching point for a deeper conversation about perception, prejudice, and the possibility of growth. The words flowed more naturally now, informed by raw experience rather than just academic understanding. A notification appeared on her phone, a text from her sister Malia, who was currently in Los Angeles working on a documentary film. "Just saw the news. Are you okay? That guy was way out of line. Dad said you handled it like a champ. Call me when you can. Love you." Sasha smiled, appreciating her sister's concern. The Obama sisters had always maintained a tight bond, supporting each other through the unique challenges of growing up in the public eye. She sent a quick reply, "I'm fine. Working on turning it into something constructive for my speech today. We'll call tonight. Love you too." Returning to her laptop, Sasha continued refining her remarks, but another thought kept intruding, the face of Marshall Reeves as he realized his error, the devastation evident in his expression as his world collapsed around him. She found herself wondering about his story, what factors had shaped his assumptions, what pressures might have contributed to his breakdown of professionalism. Understanding didn't equate to excusing, of course. His words had been inexcusable, his actions unprofessional and hurtful. But as her father had suggested, public shaming rarely led to genuine change. It might satisfy a momentary desire for justice, might serve as a warning to others, but did it actually address the root causes of such behavior? By the time the aircraft began its descent into Chicago's O'Hare International Airport, Sasha had made a decision that surprised even her, a decision that would transform an ugly incident into an opportunity for dialogue, and possibly growth. The Youth Leadership Conference at Chicago's historic Palmer House Hotel had been planned for months, bringing together hundreds of young activists from across the country to discuss issues ranging from climate change to economic justice. Sasha's invitation to deliver the afternoon keynote had been extended based on her emerging work in educational equity, not her famous name, a distinction that had meant a great deal to her when she accepted. Now, as she stood backstage waiting to be introduced, that distinction felt simultaneously more important and more complicated. The morning's incident had thrust her back into the spotlight as Barack Obama's daughter rather than as an advocate in her own right. Yet she now had an opportunity to use that attention to amplify an important message, if she could find the right words. "You ready?" asked Zoe Williams, the conference organizer who had originally invited Sasha to speak. "The audience is pretty fired up after seeing those videos. Everyone's talking about what happened at the airport." Sasha nodded, adjusting the simple pearl earrings that had been a gift from her mother on her 21st birthday. "I've revised my speech a bit. I hope that's all right." "Of course," Zoe assured her. "Whatever you want to share, this is your platform." She hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, I think it's amazing how composed you stayed through that whole thing. A lot of people wouldn't have handled it with such dignity." "I had good teachers," Sasha replied with a small smile, thinking of her parents' consistent modeling of grace under pressure. She checked her phone one last time, a text from her father confirming his arrival at the hotel and a supportive message from her mother, who was watching the live stream from Washington. The introduction began, the MC's voice carrying through the ballroom as he outlined Sasha's academic accomplishments and advocacy work. Notably, he made only a brief mention of her famous family, focusing instead on her individual contributions, exactly as she had requested when accepting the invitation months earlier. As applause greeted her entrance onto the stage, Sasha took a moment to scan the packed ballroom. Young activists of diverse backgrounds filled the seats, many using phones to record or live stream her appearance. In the back of the room, she spotted her father slipping in quietly, attempting to minimize his presence so as not to detract from her moment. "Thank you for that kind introduction," Sasha began, setting aside her prepared notes to speak more directly. "I had a whole speech planned about educational equity and youth empowerment, topics I care deeply about and still want to address today. But something happened this morning that I think offers an important lens through which to view these issues." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "Many of you may have already seen the videos from Reagan National Airport, where I was questioned, disbelieved, and ultimately asked to leave, because an employee didn't think I could possibly be who my identification clearly stated I was." Murmurs of support rippled through the audience, many nodding in recognition of an experience too familiar to too many. I could stand here and talk about how hurtful that moment was, how humiliating it felt to be publicly degraded and dismissed. I could focus on the injustice of being treated that way despite having every proper document, despite being accompanied by a Secret Service agent, despite simply trying to board a flight I had legitimately booked. Sasha took a deep breath, shifting direction. "But what I really want to talk about is what happens next. Not just for me, I'm fortunate to have resources and support that many don't have when facing similar situations. I want to talk about what happens next for all of us, including the man who looked at me and saw not a person but a stereotype." The ballroom had gone completely silent, hundreds of young leaders leaning forward in their seats. It would be easy, and perhaps satisfying in the moment, to call for this employee's termination, to demand he be made an example of, to use this incident to highlight the persistent reality of racial bias in America. And there is value in accountability, in ensuring that actions have consequences. She paused, her next words carefully chosen. But I've been thinking about something my father has often said, that real change doesn't come from public shaming or cancellation. It comes from creating spaces for growth, for learning, for the difficult conversations that actually shift perspectives. From the back of the room, Barack Obama watched his daughter with undisguised pride, recognizing the thoughtfulness and maturity that informed her words. This was not the speech of someone leveraging victimhood for attention, but of a young woman transforming a painful experience into an opportunity for broader understanding. The truth is, Sasha continued, I don't know Marshall Reeves' story. I don't know what experiences shaped his assumptions about who I could or couldn't be. I don't know what pressures he was under yesterday or last week or throughout his life. Understanding doesn't excuse his actions, but it might help us address the root causes rather than just the symptoms. She looked out at the audience, meeting the eyes of young people who had experienced their own versions of what she had faced that morning. When we talk about educational equity, we're really talking about creating a world where everyone is seen for who they truly are, where assumptions don't limit opportunities, where barriers, whether physical or perceptual, don't determine outcomes. For the next 40 minutes, Sasha wove together her prepared remarks on educational policy with reflections on the morning's incident, creating a compelling narrative about identity, perception, and the possibility of transformation. She concluded with an announcement that surprised many in the audience, including, from his expression, her father. That's why I've asked the airline not to terminate Mr. Reeves' employment, she said, her voice steady. Instead, I've proposed something different. I've offered to meet with him not for a public apology or photo opportunity, but for a genuine conversation about what happened and why. If he's willing, I believe there's more to be gained from dialogue than dismissal. The ballroom erupted in applause, many attendees rising to their feet. As Sasha thanked the audience and left the stage, she caught her father's eye. His slight nod and smile communicated volumes, approval, pride, and recognition of a torch being passed to a new generation. If you're still with us, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Subscribe to our channel right now and comment below to tell us where you're watching from. The conclusion to this incredible story is coming up next. 1 week later, in a small, neutral meeting room at Georgetown University, Sasha Obama sat waiting. The room had been chosen for its privacy and lack of political or corporate associations, a space where an honest conversation might be possible without the weight of institutional power dynamics. The door opened, admitting a visibly nervous Marshall Reeves. The past week had aged him significantly, deep shadows beneath his eyes, new lines etched around his mouth, his posture that of a man carrying a heavy burden. He had accepted the invitation to meet with considerable trepidation, half expecting a public humiliation or legal ambush despite the assurances that this would be a private conversation. Mr. Reeves, Sasha said, rising to greet him. Thank you for coming. Marshall nodded awkwardly, unsure of the proper protocol. Should he shake her hand? Apologize immediately. He had rehearsed this moment countless times over the past 7 days, but now that it had arrived, all his prepared statements evaporated. Please sit down, Sasha continued, gesturing to the chair across from her. Would you like some water or coffee? Water would be fine, Marshall managed, his voice rough with tension. As Sasha poured from a pitcher on the table between them, he gathered his courage. Ms. Obama, before anything else, I need to apologize for my behavior at the airport. It was inexcusable, unprofessional, and wrong on every level. I'm deeply ashamed of how I treated you. Sasha handed him the water glass, her expression thoughtful. I appreciate your apology, Mr. Reeves, but I didn't ask for this meeting just to hear you say you're sorry. I wanted to understand what happened, not just the what, but the why. Marshall stared down at the glass in his hands, condensation gathering beneath his fingers. I've been asking myself the same question every day since it happened, why I reacted the way I did, why I was so certain you couldn't be who you said you were. He looked up, meeting her eyes directly for the first time. The easy answer would be to say I was having a bad day or blame it on job stress. And those things were true. I just received a negative performance review. My pension was at risk. I was dealing with an overbooking situation. But that's not the whole truth. He took a sip of water, gathering his thoughts. The harder truth is that when you approached my counter and said your name was Sasha Obama, something in my mind immediately rejected the possibility. And I've had to ask myself why that was, why I found it so implausible that you could be exactly who you claim to be. And what answer did you find? Sasha asked quietly, Marshall exhaled slowly, the sound carrying the weight of difficult self-examination. That despite what I've always told myself about not seeing color, about treating everyone equally, I was carrying assumptions I never acknowledged. When I looked at you, I didn't see someone who could be a former president's daughter. I saw a young black woman who couldn't possibly belong in first class, Sasha supplied when he faltered. Yes, Marshall admitted, the single word seeming to deflate him further. And that's not who I thought I was, that's not who I want to be. Sasha nodded, taking in his words without immediate judgment. Can I tell you something about that morning, Mr. Reeves, from my perspective? Please, he said, bracing himself for what would undoubtedly be difficult to hear. When you first questioned my ID, I wasn't even surprised, Sasha began. It wasn't the first time someone has doubted who I am, and it probably won't be the last. What struck me wasn't that you questioned me. It was how quickly skepticism turned to absolute certainty that I was lying, how rapidly the situation escalated to public humiliation. She leaned forward slightly. And what I've been wondering is, if I had been a young white woman claiming the same identity, would your doubt have turned to certainty so quickly? Would you have been so ready to have me removed from the terminal? The questions hung between them, uncomfortable but necessary. Marshall's initial instinct was to defend himself, to insist he would have treated anyone the same under similar circumstances. But the past week of brutal self-honesty had stripped away those reflexive self-protections. No, he said finally, I don't think I would have. The admission felt like stepping off a cliff, but strangely, once spoken, it also felt like the beginning of solid ground beneath his feet. The truth, however uncomfortable, was at least real. Thank you for that honesty, Sasha said. It can't have been easy to acknowledge. Marshall shook his head. None of this has been easy. I've lost my job, at least temporarily. My face has been all over the news and social media. My children are embarrassed. My ex-wife called to say she wasn't surprised. He rubbed his face wearily. But the hardest part has been confronting these parts of myself I never wanted to see. I asked the airline not to terminate your employment, Sasha told him. Did they inform you of that? Marshall looked up in surprise. They said my case was under review and that you had expressed some thoughts on the matter. I assumed you'd asked for my dismissal. Actually, I suggested something different, Sasha explained. I proposed that rather than termination, they might consider a different approach to accountability, one focused on education and growth rather than punishment. She reached into her bag, retrieving a folder which she placed on the table between them. This is a proposal for a pilot program on unconscious bias training, developed in partnership with experts in the field. The airline has agreed to implement it, starting with the Reagan National Airport staff. Marshall stared at the folder, struggling to process what he was hearing. You developed a training program because of what happened. Because of what happens every day to people who don't have the platform or privilege that I do, Sasha corrected gently. My experience with you was unfortunately not unique. It was just more visible because of my last name. What I'm proposing is that instead of simply firing you and considering the problem solved, the airline address the underlying issues more systemically. She tapped the folder. The program includes education on the history and impact of racial bias, facilitated conversations between staff and passengers who have experienced discrimination, and ongoing coaching and support. If you're willing, they've agreed to offer you the opportunity to participate in the development and eventually help facilitate some sessions, drawing on your experience and perspective. Marshall blinked, overwhelmed by the unexpected direction of the conversation. You're offering me a chance to keep my job, to be part of creating this program. I'm suggesting that transformation is possible and that your experience, both as someone who acted on unconscious bias and as someone who has had to confront that reality, could be valuable in helping others examine their own assumptions, Sasha clarified. The decision ultimately rests with the airline, of course, but they've indicated willingness to consider this approach if you demonstrate genuine commitment to the process. For a moment, Marshall couldn't speak, emotion closing his throat. The contrast between what he had expected, further humiliation, perhaps legal consequences, and what was actually being offered was so stark that he struggled to process it. Why? He finally managed. After how I treated you, why would you do this? Sasha considered the question carefully. Partly because I believe people can change if given the opportunity and the tools, partly because firing one person doesn't address the systemic issues that made our interaction possible. And partly, she added with a small smile, because my parents raised me to try to leave situations better than I found them, not just to seek retribution when I've been wronged. She leaned back in her chair, her expression turning more serious. I want to be clear, Mr. Reeves. This isn't about absolving you of responsibility or pretending what happened wasn't harmful. It's about finding a more constructive path forward. For you, for the airline, and for the countless passengers who deserve to be treated with dignity regardless of what they look like or where they come from. Marshall nodded slowly, a complexity of emotions washing over him, shame for his actions, gratitude for the unexpected opportunity, and something else he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope that perhaps his career and life weren't irredeemably ruined, that he might find a way to make amends not just through words but through meaningful action. "I don't know what to say," he admitted, "except thank you for seeing something in me worth salvaging when I gave you every reason not to." "What I see," Sasha replied, "is an opportunity to turn a painful moment into something constructive. Whether that opportunity is realized depends on what happens next, on the choices you make and the work you're willing to do." She stood, signaling that their conversation was drawing to a close. "The airline will be in touch about next steps if you decide to pursue this path." As Marshall rose to leave, still processing the unexpected turn of events, Sasha offered a final thought. "You know, my father often quotes Dr. King's line about the arc of the moral universe being long but bending toward justice. What I've come to believe is that it doesn't bend on its own, we bend it, through thousands of individual choices and conversations just like this one." In the weeks and months that followed, the incident at Reagan National Airport faded from headlines as newer controversies captured public attention. But its ripple effects continued to spread in less visible but more meaningful ways. Marshall Reeves did return to work, not at his former position, but in a new role helping to implement the bias awareness program that had grown out of his confrontation with Sasha Obama. The journey wasn't smooth. He faced skepticism from colleagues, ongoing public criticism, and his own continued struggles with recognizing and addressing ingrained patterns of thought. But for perhaps the first time in his career, he found purpose beyond simply processing passengers, in the difficult, necessary work of examining how unconscious biases shaped interactions and experiences within the airport environment. For Sasha Obama, the incident became a formative moment in her professional identity. Rather than allowing herself to be defined solely as a victim of discrimination or as an extension of her famous father, she leveraged the attention to advance meaningful conversation about bias and belonging in American public spaces. Her speech at the Youth Leadership Conference, which had incorporated her airport experience, was widely shared and led to invitations to speak at other venues about constructive approaches to addressing discrimination. 6 months after their initial meeting, Sasha and Marshall found themselves sharing a stage at a transportation industry conference, presenting the results of the pilot program that had emerged from their confrontation. The audience, airline executives, airport managers, and policymakers from across the country, listened with interest as they described how a potentially career-ending incident had been transformed into an opportunity for systemic improvement. "The easy path would have been termination and public apology," Sasha explained to the assembled industry leaders. "That might have satisfied calls for immediate accountability, but it wouldn't have addressed the underlying issues that made our confrontation possible in the first place." Marshall, noticeably thinner and grayer than he had been at their first meeting, but speaking with newfound purpose, added, "What this program has taught us is that changing institutional culture requires more than just removing bad apples. It requires creating spaces for honest conversation, providing tools for self-reflection, and demonstrating that growth is both possible and valued." The program they presented showed promising early results. Customer complaints related to bias had decreased by 32% at Reagan National, and staff reported greater confidence in navigating diverse passenger interactions. Other airports had begun expressing interest in implementing similar approaches. As the presentation concluded and the audience applauded, Sasha glanced at Marshall, still not a friend, perhaps, but a collaborator in important work. Their journey from confrontation to cooperation hadn't erased what happened that October morning, but it had transformed it into something neither could have anticipated. A case study in how accountability and growth could coexist, how a moment of bias could become a catalyst for meaningful change. In the hotel hallway after their presentation, Barack Obama appeared, having watched from the back of the conference room. He shook Marshall's hand, a gesture that would have seemed impossible months earlier. "Mr. Reeves," the former president said, "that was a thoughtful presentation. Thank you for having the courage to share your perspective so openly." Marshall, still somewhat awestruck in Obama's presence despite their previous interactions during the program's development, nodded respectfully. "Thank you, sir. Your daughter has been remarkable throughout this entire process. You raised an extraordinary young woman. She takes after her mother. Obama replied with his characteristic smile. Then more seriously, what you two have created here matters. It's easy to condemn, much harder to create pathways for genuine transformation. I'm impressed with what you've accomplished. As Marshall excused himself to speak with conference organizers, Obama turned to his daughter. You know, when I was your age, I don't think I would have had the wisdom to handle a situation like this the way you did. I'm proud of you, Sash. Sasha smiled, linking her arm through her father's as they walked toward the exit. I had good examples to follow, she said simply. Outside, autumn had painted Chicago in brilliant colors, the late afternoon sun gilding the city where her father had begun his journey to the presidency, where her own path was now unfolding in ways she couldn't have predicted. One incident at an airport checkpoint had opened unexpected doors, created unforeseen possibilities. A reminder that sometimes, the most powerful changes begin in our most difficult moments. As they stepped into the crisp October air, Barack Obama looked down at his daughter, no longer the child who had entered the White House at age 7, but a young woman charting her own course with wisdom beyond her years. Ready for whatever comes next? He asked. Sasha nodded, her expression reflecting both the gravity of the work ahead and the hope that had emerged from an unlikely source. Always, she replied. That's what Obamas do. The journey that had begun with harsh words at an airport counter had not ended. Indeed, the real work was only beginning. But in transforming a moment of bias into an opportunity for growth, both Sasha Obama and Marshall Reeves had demonstrated a path forward that offered something more constructive than cancellation, more enduring than viral outrage, more healing than punishment alone. It was a path that required courage from both the hurt and those who had caused hurt, the courage to engage, to listen, to change. A path that recognized humanity in its fullness, with all its flaws and all its potential for transformation. A path that bent the moral arc of the universe, if only slightly, toward justice. If you enjoyed this incredible true story of transformation and reconciliation, please subscribe to our channel and comment below with your thoughts. Don't forget to share where you're watching from. Your support helps us continue bringing these inspiring stories to viewers around the world.